Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Underground. This is the briefing for Sunday, the 10th of October, 2021, and as usual, it is being recorded on October 9th. So let's jump right into the weather. Lots of significant weather patterns covering most of the United States over the next 12 hours, with lots of cloud cover at very low levels being quite common throughout most regions. EENT, or the end of evening nautical twilight, the point in time where the sun finishes setting, is at 7:34 p.m. Eastern Time, but that will be very similar for the rest of the time zones throughout the country. And that combined with the low lunar illumination of 14.1% means that it's going to be long, dark nights over the next few days. And like I mentioned, we're starting to get the first inklings of winter weather moving down for the year as we have various weather systems creating all kinds of hazards for various spots around the country. Moving into NOTAMs, really only one of note, and it is the standard presidential vacation NOTAM. So Biden is spending the weekend, as usual, at his residence in Wilmington, Delaware. For the civil unrest forecast, really absolutely no changes from the last few briefs. So I'm just going to skip right past it. Nothing major on that front. And moving through logistics really quickly, really no major changes. We still have the school bus driver shortages. Of course, that is now a national problem for most school districts around the country, but by far Massachusetts and Ohio have been hit the hardest with this, and Massachusetts and Ohio are the ones that we're starting to see a military response for. Also, we still have the water shortage out west, still creating a lot of problems out that way. As we move forward into the winter season, we'll start to see precipitation. We'll start to see how that actually affects things and how the water shortage gets resolved. Hopefully, it will be pretty soon. And also, we still have the microchip shortage that is affecting essentially the entire country at this stage, but specifically the states on the slides are being heavily affected with regards to automobile manufacturing. And as far as new additions for this cycle, we are tracking the chatter surrounding potential gasoline shortages that are a result of the shipping congestion, which I'll mention here in a minute. So I just did want to briefly mention that potential. I myself and none of the other staff here have been able to help me drill down enough to give you a solid analysis on that right now. Of course, a few days after this video goes out, I might look like an idiot, but right now, I just don't know how severe this shipping congestion is going to affect petroleum imports for processing. I would venture a guess to say that it will affect things, but as far as how much, I just don't know right now. And moving on to critical infrastructure, again, from last time, the Crystal Valley ransomware attack is kind of petered off. There's really nobody talking about it now, including Crystal Valley themselves. So, no new information. I'll take it off next time, but I just wanted to really leave it on there because I haven't had any real change from it. But moving on to number two, Facebook cyber attack that everybody knows about because the vast majority of people use Facebook or their services. So as far as analysis goes, so talking about the actual cyber attack is kind of a moot point at this point because everybody's already heard about it. But as far as the analysis goes, again, this is something we've been talking about in most of our content. Any reliance on social media for things like infrastructure or communications is probably not a good idea. Facebook provides more services than just allowing your cousin to post cat pictures on the internet. Since the overwhelming majority of people on the planet are plugged into Facebook or Instagram at some level, means that when that plug is pulled, the whole planet goes comms dark. So, again, there's a lot of talk and chatter out there about maybe this was intentional on Facebook's part. Don't really have any indications either way, so it's kind of a moot point to talk about it. A lot of people are also saying that this might have something to do with Facebook's quote unquote whistleblower, right? The most non whistleblower that I've ever seen. Again, really nothing worth talking about on that front because there's just no information. Sure, theory is a theory, but until we know more, who really knows? All we know is that Facebook was down, which again presents vulnerabilities if we are dependent on Facebook's infrastructure for things like communication. For number three, the shipping congestion that we have been talking about for weeks continues, and actually might have been the cause for number four, which is that a pipeline off the coast of California was damaged, causing a small spill. However, recent investigation by the pipeline owner has indicated that the breach could have been caused months ago and might not have been the result of an anchor strike at all. But right now, the details are pretty sketchy. It's really hard to rule out anything until more investigation is done. In any case, with more and more ships sitting at anchor outside of U.S. ports and causing all kinds of problems, we should expect to see more of this kind of thing, not just to include pipelines, but communications cables as well, which is a vastly important topic that we will have to cover in more depth at a later time. And moving on to significant governmental actions, the first point there being Connecticut is taking a page out of New York's book and doing exactly the same thing that New York is doing. They are firing doctors who refuse to uh, jab themselves, right? And they are replacing them with soldiers. So we'll see how this works out. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But moving on to the second point there, this has gotten a lot of press from a lot of conservative media outlets. Again, the FBI mobilizing against opponents of CRT. So here is a statement from the DOJ. I know it's kind of small text, but you can either read it in the sources or in the slides. The FBI is directly creating the infrastructure and the task forces and the required logistical planning, right, to start prosecuting anyone who is going to be opposing the mandates that school boards are coming up with. So this comes right on the heels of just a few days ago, a lot of people trying to petition the FBI to use the Patriot Act against those who are opposing the regime. That was something that's been circulating on social media for a while now, and now we're starting to see the FBI kind of move in that direction, which is interesting. Also, it should be noted that this might just be a case of classic corruption, because the FBI director is the father-in-law of the co-founder of a company that sells CRT school curriculum. So it could just be a case of classic corruption. Who knows? The FBI, from their senior leadership, has made it very clear that that's the kind of road they want to go down. But I guess we'll have to see how this goes. But I guess the larger point is that the FBI is most certainly coming after normal Americans now. We saw the pivot, right? We saw the writing on the wall when the military started getting this whole extremism crackdown, right? Well, now it's coming. Now they're coming for Americans. So, just like we've predicted, and just like quite literally thousands of others predicted, this kind of stuff is happening. So, I guess we'll have to see how this works out. I don't know if it's actually going to work out in terms of FBI agents being plants at like PTA meetings and school board meetings to arrest anybody who says anything kind of hostile towards the school board. I don't know if that's how it's going to work out, but it would not be a bad idea to assume that in the worst, the most dangerous COA, right? And work from there. So, sort of along the same lines, point number 3 there is the FBI is working with Google to get warrants for specific keywords. When I look at stuff like this, it's almost like this entire briefing today is turning out to have a mood of "I told you so," because there's just so much information today that has either already happened in the past or ourselves and literally, again, thousands of others have been talking about for years. And of course, the FBI is at it again with their draconian warrants. So I guess everybody forgot when the FBI, just a couple of months ago, requested the IP addresses of people who read a specific news article, right? Not wrote, but read a specific news article. So, yeah, Google working with the FBI has not been a surprise since the old days of Snowden and the prison program, and it's certainly not surprising today. I just wanted to highlight this because a lot of people have sent it to us, and it's a good reminder that if you value privacy, it would probably be a good idea to stay away from Google as much as you can. Moving on to number 4 there, the Colorado healthcare system, UC Health, has issued statements that they will be denying organ transplants to people who are unjabbed, quote, in almost all circumstances. This came to light after a transplant patient received this letter informing her that she had been removed from the active recipient list. Yeah, our assessment on this development is that this is par for the course and completely in line with everything that we and others have been saying for at least 2 years now. So I'm not going to rant and rave about that anymore. It's pretty clear how things are going. However, this is a great reminder that there are other nations around the world that have completely returned to normal, aren't requiring medical passports, and aren't withholding medical treatment for political reasons. So, if you are seriously ill or have a chronic medical condition that requires medical intervention that could be easily denied, you might want to consider receiving that treatment in another country at this point, or at least start thinking about that. Start that process of thinking about it. Again, this is obviously not medical advice. It's up to you to make your own decisions. I know, shocker, right? Making your own medical decisions in 2021 is a rarity, I guess, but for me, if I needed some significant medical care right now, I would be very seriously considering my options. Because even though this is just one hospital system out of the thousands in the country, the fact that this can happen once proves that it can happen elsewhere too. And if hospitals are allowed and have the desire to deny life saving treatment to people for political reasons, the entire system is kind of tarnished to a certain degree. Certainly to the point that we now genuinely have to think about things like, is my hospital going to help me if I am unjabbed? These are the things that we need to start working on getting answers for right now before this becomes a more widespread problem. And moving on to number 5 there, Bill Gates is he's getting a lot of press once more. His population control quote being confirmed to be true, and is now being kind of touted as a good thing. So this is the same exact mentality. If we want to take a step back for a second, this is the same exact mentality as the election stuff, in which the mainstream media claimed that there was no fraud, until a Time magazine article came out that framed the fraud as a good thing, like they banded together to save democracy or something. We all remember that, right? So also the same mentality with General Milley's sort of treasonous acts, right? He doubled down in his testimony to Congress and confirmed that he did indeed do all of those treasonous things, but it was to save the world from the evil Trump, right? Well, here we are with fact checking sites all over the internet confirming that Bill Gates did indeed say what he said, and that he did indeed mean what he said, as in it wasn't a slip of the tongue or an error in his speech, which has been the classic excuse for this since his TED Talk went viral. But now the fact checkers are saying that it's true, and these are screenshots of the actual fact checking statement on this particular quote. And the one line that is kind of hilarious is this sentence right here, which is kind of funny. See, what they're trying to do, what the fact checkers are trying to do, is separate the rate of growth from total number, which is definitely two separate things, right? In mathematics, reducing rate of rise does not mean reducing already existing numbers, right? But here's the problem. When you apply that to human beings, the population of the Earth, that still sounds like the Dr. Strangelove approach, right? So, to his statement, my question is this: how exactly does Bill Gates intend to reduce the growth of the human population without enacting some kind of global one-child policy to prevent people from being born? So yeah, I guess there's really not a whole lot of intel value there, just other than just to say that it's kind of interesting, and this whole mentality of deny, 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 acknowledge, and then tout as being a good thing is definitely a tactic that a lot of people are using these days. And when it comes to the actual information, right? Because this has gotten a lot of people's attention, even though, like, man, I watched that TED Talk when it came out like years ago, and I was concerned then, and I'm concerned now about as much. Like that level of concern has not either increased or decreased. So if you want my opinion, right, there isn't much difference between outright murdering people and not allowing people to have kids, right? Again, there is a slight difference on paper, right? But if the end result is the same, lower human population, it's very hard to argue that population control is a good thing. In any case, Bill Gates is still advocating for governments to determine when a person is allowed to exist. So, yeah, I mean, that's really all I've got to say on that. And since the theme of today is kind of talking about individuals and remembering the past, right? Moving on to this particular issue, which is this is something that has gone kind of viral again amongst a lot of conservative sites over the past few days. Sheriff Villanueva has gotten this good press because he has stated that he will not force his deputies and staff to get the jab, stating that, and I quote, "I don't want to be in a position to lose 5-10% of my workforce overnight on a blank mandate," right? But here's the problem. Read his quote and observe what it is not. He did not say, "I don't want to enforce this mandate because it's unconstitutional, against human rights, and just plain wrong." No, he didn't say that at all. For him, it's a personnel issue. He knows that his deputies will quit overnight, and that loss is not acceptable to him. Now, you might be wondering, why am I talking about all of this? It seems like kind of a non-issue. After all, we can't exactly go off of words that he didn't say, right? The words not said. You can't exactly hold somebody accountable for not doing something, or at least it's very hard to do. Well, here's my point exactly. This is the same guy that was chomping at the bit to round up as many American citizens as possible. He is the man with the plan when it came to the lockdowns earlier this year and last year, and fervently and actively hunted down Americans for having the audacity to have people in their homes, arresting hundreds and hundreds of people for simply being at someone else's house. He created special task forces to raid private residences, looking for partygoers, and in the process, searched and confiscated dozens of guns. He also set up the infrastructure for neighbors to report on neighbors, and actively encouraged people to report on friends and family who might be violating the governor's mandates and the LA mayor's mandates. And let us not forget Sheriff Villanueva's personal pet project, Operation Homebound. This was the highly controversial program in which badged sheriff's deputies would go out into the community to give people the jab in their own home. Now, here's the problem. This program got a lot of bad press because videos surfaced of badged law enforcement officers forcibly restraining mentally disabled people and forcibly jabbing them against their will. As one might expect, a lot of blogs and so-called media websites spun this way up because, well, history repeating itself is, I guess, the theme for the past couple of years. However, the sheriff's deputies were called out by the guardians of the people that were being forcibly jabbed. So technically, this was all completely legal and above board. Here's the problem, though, with this. It doesn't really look great to have a badged law enforcement officer with a gun sticking a syringe into someone who is screaming, crying, and doing everything they can to resist. It just looks really bad. And considering the de facto implications of the officers being armed with weapons, it looks even worse. Even if a court says that that person is mentally incapable of consenting themselves, this is raising a lot of questions about what that word consent means, I guess. Plus, there's always the problem of, what's the penalty for resisting a doctor or nurse's treatment? Not really anything at all. But what is the penalty for resisting a badged and armed law enforcement officer? You see how this is now a huge problem? And I go out of the way to talk about all of this because it is a lesson that we as a people clearly have not learned. Right now, a lot of politicians are being put up on a pedestal because they are fighting Biden's mandates, which, on a side note, haven't even been written yet. But those same politicians that are fighting Biden right now were salivating at the prospect of locking down Americans. Florida and Texas were some of the very first states to put up police checkpoints on their borders. How quickly we forget these events. So I wanted to make this digression in hopes that some of you will not forget what these people did. And that is a huge thing to remember for analysis moving forward. When we're talking about the likelihood of resistance efforts, we've always got to keep these things in the backs of our minds. And that just because a politician or some kind of official is saying the good stuff right now, We can't forget what they did just 1 year ago. All right, switching gears, we have significantly changed the CONUS deployment map so as to be a little bit easier to understand, because my own first crack at it was not great and there were quite a few errors. So here is a reference slide that helps explain how to read the following slides if you are not familiar with these topics. As usual, you can pause and screenshot, or preferably download the PDF of these slides from our Odyssey page. So let's get to it. In the Northeast, the New York National Guard has begun preparations for deploying to various hospitals as a result of the government firing healthcare workers, and right now we're projecting elements from Spencer's 42nd Infantry Division to be activated to fill these vacancies. Again, not everyone from these units will be deployed. We just don't know numbers right now because National Guard deployments are usually based on volunteers from random units. So as we go through this, keep in mind that we will almost certainly be overestimating numbers. So for New York, we're kind of in the dark right now as to how many volunteers are going to be stepping up to take positions in New York hospitals. Connecticut is in the exact same situation, with their governor terminating doctors and nurses who refuse the jab and replacing them with soldiers. This is still in its early stages, so we don't really have a good idea as to how Yvonne's joint staff is going to be required to handle these deployments, so we're just going to have to stay tuned on that. And finally, for Massachusetts, small elements of soldiers from the 26th Maneuver Enhancement Brigade continue to be deployed to drive school buses. No major change on that from last brief. Moving on down to the southeast, several states have deployed various sized elements to hospitals around their states. And we have a better intel picture for Kentucky and Tennessee. So Kentucky is deploying small groups of soldiers from Cavallini's 149th MEB to support local hospitals, and Tennessee is deploying soldiers from Turner's 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment and Patterson's 230th Sustainment Brigade to also support local area hospitals. Again, the press reports of exactly how many soldiers are deployed from these units vary widely, so when we get a better picture, we will provide that update as well. And finally, the states of Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia have also deployed very small numbers of troops. We're talking probably a platoon's worth of soldiers in each of these states, again, with the mission of supporting area hospitals. Moving to the Midwest, really there's not much going on with regards to National Guard deployments. We're still waiting to see if Ohio will deploy soldiers to help with the school bus driver crisis, but press statements by various government officials have confirmed that an unknown number of soldiers are currently in training to learn how to drive a school bus. So we are fully expecting this deployment to take place, and we will provide an update when we learn how Harris's Joint Battle Staff is going to be deploying units. Out southwest, we have quite significant deployments of troops along the southern border, with Hamilton's 36th Infantry Division providing most of the soldiers. Specifically, Perez's 36th Sustainment Brigade and Rivera's 72nd Brigade Combat Team are the units that are providing most of the soldiers for this mission. Also, we have significant deployments from the Texas State Guard as well, which, for those of you that don't know, is separate from the National Guard. It's still a military unit, but they still have a military organization, but they are a separate command structure, right? So we don't have any good numbers for how many State Guard soldiers have been activated, but when we get some publicly releasable numbers, we will push that out as well. And also, we are not counting the thousands of National Customs and Border Patrol forces or the hundreds of other law enforcement figures that have been deployed to support this mission. All we have are press statements that indicate that all total, there are roughly 1,000 state law enforcement officers and about 2,500 soldiers from Texas that are supporting this mission. Again, these numbers are very approximate, and a lot of other states have sent troops and police officers to the border as well, so we're still trying to count everybody and tally everybody up. Arizona and New Mexico have also deployed personnel to the border, but not nearly in the numbers that Texas has. It's such a small number that it's not even close. So when we get a better number for those states, we'll update that as well. And finally, out west, we have significant deployments of soldiers and airmen in Oregon to support local hospitals. In Oregon, their National Guard situation is kind of unique, with the Air National Guard really being the main force. So Stencil has deployed significant numbers of airmen from UNRU's 142nd Fighter Wing as the main force for providing personnel to local hospitals. However, the very small Army National Guard contingent has also deployed soldiers from the 41st Brigade Combat Team, mostly just a handful of soldiers from the 1st Battalion 186th Infantry Regiment. And for the school attendance mask mandate tracker, really no updates from last brief, except that I corrected an error that's been there for a long time. Vermont has had a mask mandate for a while now, and they extended it to November 1st. And for those of you who are just now finding us, every single state in the nation, as far as we can tell, has a mask mandate somewhere in the state. Usually it's the largest school district in the state or the school district that is nearest the state capital. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that there really are mask mandates everywhere. It's just we're trying to track where the states are at the state level cracking things down, or the states where the overwhelming majority of school districts are requiring masks. And for the actual jab mandate, really no changes from last brief. California is still going to mandate it, make it mandatory, but we're waiting to see how that's actually going to logistically work out, because there is significant resistance to that, as one might imagine. And again, really no major change to the overall medical resistance tracker. And for international issues, really the only two things that I just briefly wanted to mention were Sweden and Denmark. So we're starting to see a lot of resistance to a particular medical substance in both of these countries due to people having heart problems from it. So you can research this on your own a little bit more, because there's a lot of data that goes with this, but Sweden has stopped the M version of the jab for people under the age of 30, and Denmark has done the same for people under the age of 18. So we're starting to see a few European nations, most of the Scandinavian countries and the Northern European nations push back on a lot of this stuff, because they're finding out that there's a lot of healthcare issues that are kind of coming along with this. So again, due to YouTube's policies, we can't talk about it at all. And even if we did want to flout YouTube's policies, there's still too much information to talk about, right? So the situation has really gotten very inflammatory when it comes to the actual jab itself on the medical side of things, and the studies and the science going back and forth from both sides of the debate. So that's really up to you to kind of to research that some more. But I would suggest taking a look at some of this stuff coming out of Northern Europe. It's very interesting stuff, to say the least. So I'm sure that a lot of other incidents have occurred around the world, particularly things like the Chinese situation has developed a little bit more, but I haven't had time to actually sit down and develop that out into an actual concrete analysis for you guys, because myself and the rest of the team have been focusing domestically for this brief. So for next time, we will definitely develop out a lot more international stuff to talk about. But for now, that's pretty much all I've got. So again, a special thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. You guys and gals out there rock and are actually making it a lot easier. You guys are helping a lot more than you know. And here are your sources for today. Again, the print is very small, I know, so if you're watching this on a phone, it's probably going to be very hard to see, but I did want to put the sources in here at the end of each video for posterity's sake, and just in case someone finds this video and doesn't see the sources in the attachment or anything like that. So there's the first slide, there's slide 2. You can pause it and check this stuff out. Here's slide 3. And sources slide 4. So again, the sources for this in PDF format. This whole brief is available in PDF format on our Odyssey page. So again, if you're looking at this in many years in the future, which is what seems to happen with a lot of our YouTube videos, you can find that data. And in the unlikely event that our Odyssey page is shut down for whatever reason, or we transfer to something else, you can still, at least in this particular video file, have the sources. So it might be a pain to type it out, but again, we make videos here for the future, not just for right now. So again, for posterity's sake, I like to include all the sources in the actual video file itself. So thank you again for watching. We'll be back at it with another brief very soon, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.